Hi, Colin Sanders here, and this is the History Books Review. And this episode is the promised 100th anniversary episode, where I'm doing a question and answer session to thank people for listening over the last 100 episodes. It's actually not 100 in any meaningful numerical sense. I've done slightly more than 100 podcasts. I've done slightly fewer than 100 podcasts on the Gibbon review, which has been the main focus of the History Books Review so far, and I've done a lot more than 100 videos, so I can't quite remember how I ended up deciding this was the 100th episode, but let's all just enjoy the wackiness of it not actually being the 100th episode, shall we? I'm very grateful to all the people who took the time to send in questions. I wasn't at all sure I'll get any at all, but luckily I have a few very loyal followers who are also rather embarrassingly positive in their comments, to which I'm very, very grateful, and rather sheepish because this is a very, very minor thing that I do, and it's encouraging to think that anybody's listening to it. One of my biggest fans is Ragamond von Vallet. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and he's asked me 3 questions. The first is, he's always wondering what are those plastic files behind me, and the answer to that is they're to do with my business. I am a consulting cosmetic chemist, and I use those to keep track of all my reports and the kind of stuff I have to do to earn a living, and which stops me doing as much podcasting as I'd like to do. Secondly, did you ever make another video on a related subject or on a different account? I've made a couple of videos to do with my cosmetic science work, and they're totally different in style, content, and bear no relationship whatever to the History Books Review. But if you really want to find them, I think my account's called a Beauty Scientist or something like that, and they're not even as popular as these ones, unfortunately, but there you have it. And thirdly, are you thinking about something else to review in parallel? Well, Ragamond, I've already got my hands full with what I am doing, but what I will say is that the Gibbon review is basically intended to be the start of a really massive project whereby I'm going to review history books throughout history up to the present day. Now, obviously, I haven't even got halfway through Gibbon yet, so this is a project which is very much one that I haven't really got to grips with yet. But I've got some of the books lined up for what I plan to do to work on, and I've sort of got this idea that I will pick them up as I go along. Obviously, you can tell I'm not a young man. I will be retiring at some point in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, and maybe that will give me the time to do it. Who knows? But that's what I would like to do. Avant Gardner and somebody else who, very sadly, I'm afraid I've lost the name of, asked the same question, which was what made me interested in Roman history in general and Gibbon in particular. And the answer is very much what I've just said to Ragamond. I don't have any particular interest in Roman history over and above any other period of history. I like the whole sweep of history across the whole world and across every time era. I started with Rome simply because there is not a huge amount to say about prehistory, and I thought if I put in the Egyptians and the Greeks, I just wouldn't get into the real meat of stuff quickly enough. So I started with Gibbon, more or less, not exactly arbitrarily, but it just seemed to me like a logical starting point. I think Greek history was the first period in history I was interested in. I just sort of followed it chronologically from there. And I've also been very interested in the sort of artefacts that grew up around me. I come from a town called Eastbourne on the south coast of England, and that's got some rather impressive Napoleonic defences that were built on the coast to keep the French out during the Revolutionary and the Napoleonic Wars. So that always seemed very interesting, and that has given me a great interest in Napoleon. There was also not too far away a Roman castle. I've done a video actually where I go back to this Roman castle. It's called Pevensey, and I used to play there when I was a kid. And that's another thing that sort of made history seem very real to me. And on the Downs, not far from where I live, the Downs are some rolling green hills in southern England, is a big chalk figure of a giant. It's about sort of 30 metres in height, and that's another thing that just makes history seem very, very real and very, very alive to me. And I've just always found the subject fascinating. Why Gibbon? Basically, when I was sort of very early teenager, sort of 13, 14, I used to go to the public library, and there was a book on the shelf called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. I had no idea it was a classic. I had no idea it was a particularly old book, but it was big and thick and seemed full of detail. So I took it off the shelf and started reading it purely as a history. I didn't realise it had any literary merit, and it captivated me, and has done so ever since. It's remained my favourite book, certainly my favourite non-fiction book, and I've read it I think 3 times just to read it, and I'm now reading it in much more detail for the 4th time for this series. Thuggish Rose asked a very interesting question, which is any thoughts on why Roman society did not seem to advance much technologically from the beginning of the empire to the 5th century AD? Intriguing question. I'm not so sure that this lack of technological progress is all that true. Certainly the Roman fort I described playing of, Pevensey, is a lot more sophisticated than some older Roman forts you can see around. It's got big sort of bastions for missile firing, and I think the Roman Empire actually did make some quite significant technological progress. The thing that really brings it home to me is that the Almagest by Ptolemy. Ptolemy came up with this superb model of the universe in Alexandria in the 1st century, which is 100 years into the empire. And really, that's one of the all-time great scientific achievements of mankind. It's been rather eclipsed by the fact that it was the wrong model, and he put the Earth in the centre, and had all these planets on these fictitious spheres. So it looks silly when we look at it, but when you think about what it did as a model, it's an amazing achievement to be able to predict the movements of the stars and the planets so far in advance by the use of what today we call mathematical modelling is quite stunning. So I don't altogether accept the premise that the Romans didn't progress technologically or scientifically either. Thuggish Rose makes the point that there were other periods where science seems to advance more quickly, and suggests it was due to competition from other states. Now, that I think that's true. There's nothing that promotes competition like having your neighbours developing weapons more quickly than you are. And I think if you look at the history of Europe, particularly the history of Europe post the 15th century, there was massive innovation in warfare, and also the organisation behind warfare, all of which led on to big spending by the states, which led to the modernisations of societies and the creation of the world we live in today. And none of that applied in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire certainly wasn't militarily safe, but it didn't have the same level of competition. It wasn't in a multipolar world, I think, is the way to describe it. It was the Romans and the non-Romans. It wasn't a question of there being half a dozen competing states which could fight each other on a level playing field. So yes, I think it was competition from other states, but I think it's easy to exaggerate the alleged stagnation of the Roman Empire, though it's a thing that does come up quite often, and you do see people saying it a lot. Deutster 100, I think I pronounced that right, Deutster 100 from the USA. It says in the USA there's been comments by the opposition that the president is managing the decline of US power. So the question is, do you see similarities between the time of the Roman Empire when it began to decline and the recent history of the Pax Americana? And he quotes examples of the annexation of the Crimea by Russia and China redrawing the maritime border near Japan as examples of the decline of US power. Well, I have to say, as declining powers go, one state annexing a small part of another state on the other side of the world, and a purely technical change to a maritime boundary which no other state has accepted. Those are fairly minor challenges to US power, I think. In fact, if you look at the way the US dominates the modern world and compare it to the way Rome dominated its world, there really is no comparison. The United States is far and away the most powerful state on the planet. Its military expenditure, I think, is equivalent to that of the rest of the world put together, and even that underestimates the strength of the United States, because several of the next five are very, very strong US allies, like here in Britain. I mean, there's no way the United States is worried about the Royal Navy or the British Army attacking it. Likewise, some of the other big military spenders like Israel. I mean, Israel is not a threat to the United States in any way, shape or form. So basically, the United States bestrides the world like a colossus, and I see no evidence whatever of any decline at all. Maybe you could say relative to the extent at which it dominated the world in 1945, when it was the only nuclear power. But even then, in 1945, Russia was an active enemy and was capable of challenging it, though in the end not remotely successfully. But really, I mean, the comparison in the stage at which Roman power is compared with Russian power is you've got to be at the age of Augustus now, I would say. I know Americans love to think they're declining. I think what is going on in the United States is quite interesting, that you've got a growth of inequality, and you've got some parts of the states declining quite badly. So if you look at somewhere like Detroit, that's sort of deindustrializing and basically becoming less civilized than it used to be, because the manufacturing has shifted to China. But you only have to go down the coast to California and see. Actually, Detroit is not the coast, is it? Sorry, excuse my terrible American geography. You only have to go across the continent to California to see a highly vibrant and successful economic activity going on, which dominates the world in every way. Is the United States a paper tiger, like Chairman Mao suggested? Does it appear powerful, but is it sort of weak underneath? It's very hard to see how that's the case. The military expenditure is about 10% of the gross national product. I mean, that's not really overstretched by any stretch of the imagination, and really, I just don't see any challenge to the United States. I don't see anything eating it away from the inside. I don't see its institutions declining. Maybe you could argue that the political debate is a bit stale at the moment compared to how it has been in the past, but there are plenty of countries who would give their give their right arm to have the kind of political freedoms they've got in the United States. I see the United States as being the overwhelming superpower for the next 100 years easily, and maybe for 3 or 4 or 500 years. I don't see China even remotely coming anywhere near it in the anywhere in the near future. And so basically, no, I don't see any parallel at all. But I do know that the British love to knock the British. I know the Americans love to knock the Americans because we get all their media over here. And if you go to France or Germany, the French and the Germans are deeply absorbed with just how bad modern day France is, and just what a state modern Germany is. I don't know any other countries well enough, but I'm betting that any country at any time in history, you'll find people who are convinced that the whole thing is going to hell in a handcart, and that they're living in the worst possible times, in the depths of the most dreadful decline. I got a question from Dave Dalton, which was, are there any resources beyond Google for researching history? And he gave me a very detailed question, which I'm afraid I have no idea of the answer to. The biggest resource I use apart from Google, which is basically my main tool for researching these things, apart from my library in the next room there, is a brilliant program called Calibre. You need to have a Kindle to get the full benefit from it, but Calibre is a free program which, one of its facilities is it digs out loads and loads of old books and puts them into a form you can read them in, which is fantastic. But I'm not an academic historian. I don't have access to anything that nobody else has, and that probably shows sometimes. But that's the answer to that question. And I'd just finally like to just thank Christine Van Dellen for saying some very nice things without actually asking a question. Anyway, I hope that was interesting. It was totally unscripted and off the top of my head, so it probably wasn't quite as smooth and professional as I usually am, which isn't all that smooth or professional anyway. But hopefully you'll find it of some interest. And if you've got to the end of it, thanks for listening.